Well, good morning, Green Prix racers. Uh, After finishing up the fall race, I kind of tried to capture a few of the things I talked to several of the teams about, and it seemed like a good topic for our next kind of video is suspension basics. And then a driver's tip, and I even added one more on wire security because we had several cars, more than a couple, had issues with the battery, the wires from the battery coming loose, either the quick disconnect or actually the terminal itself coming off the battery. So yes, a quick fix, but it's still time off the track fixing it. So a couple suggestions there. And it's up to the team. Maybe you can come up with an even better solution. So as you guys know me at this point, Mike Brakey, the Chattanooga Green Prix race director. And that picture seemed to fit too. And we're actually going to look at a Formula One car suspension-wise in this video. So let's talk a little bit, kind of like we did with the racing etiquette and the grip circle. This is a little more technical perhaps, but about suspension, what it means, how to set it up. And this is, all of it applies to the F-24s. Most of it applies to the Goblins as well. So it's useful to both. The first thing we're going to start with is this idea of toe in, toe out. And if you think of it, think about your feet. If they're pointing straight ahead versus if you're toed in or toed out, which way your toes are pointing. So that's what, and my head's in the way already. Let's move it here. It's in the way everywhere. Talking about toe. If you have zero toe, the two front tires, and this is kind of a mock-up of an F-24 front end, are pointing straight down the racetrack. If your car has what's known as toe out, they're pointed just like you would think of your toes pointing out, toe in this way. Why is that important? Well, it affects the handling of the car, but also with a low horsepower race car, both Goblins and F-24s, you've only got the 24 volts. You're trying to maximize every single amp coming out of that battery to push your car down the racetrack. And so imagine a car with the toe out situation, trying to go down the track. The tires are scrubbing. And even if it's a little bit, it still takes away from the top speed and makes your battery work harder, which, the last 5 minutes of the race, it might start giving out. Same with toe in. So what you're looking for is minimum rolling resistance, i.e. straight ahead. And so let's look at, okay, what can we do about it? Here's how you measure it. And it's relatively simple. I try not to get too cosmic. The thin blue line here is the center of your axle. And I know it's not a perfect drawing. So what you do to measure your toe is a straight edge of some sort. Maybe a pair of rulers, 2x4s. You want them to be straight, perfectly straight, and you lean them up against the edge of the tire. Right? Then you take a measurement X and a measurement Y, and you compare those two. So let's say X is greater than Y. That means the front measurement is greater than the rear measurement. That means you're toed out. Again, we know toe out, toe in, bad because it increases rolling resistance. So conversely, if X is shorter, now you've got toe in. If they're the same, then you've got zero toe, which is 99.9% what you're looking for. And I will go into a little more detail here in just a second. So let's do an example. Let's say you measure your car and it's 51 in the front, 52 in the back. That means you have 1 inch of toe in. When you do this, I suggest you get a clipboard, a piece of paper, something to write these down. And I actually, when I do my race car, I draw a picture and I put an arrow, direction of travel, because you measure the two and all of a sudden you go, okay, which was which? And now you're adjusting and you may end up making it worse. Okay, so if Y is greater, that means it's longer in the back, then that means the tires are pointing in, toed in, right? Okay, now this additional piece, see this orange line? That is your steering arms, those threaded rods. And just as an aside, we're looking at, I know one of the teams, Apison, looked up and was able to get for relatively cheap a rod that's actually threaded differently on either end. So you turn the rod and it pushes the wheels in and out. And I'll get more into detail on that. What you have right now is not that. But Green Spaces, we Green Prix folks are looking at getting that for all the teams. So now what? I need to either lengthen or shorten the steering rods, okay, to either pull the back edge because the steering rods are behind the pivot points for the axle, your steering arms. So I shorten or lengthen those, and that's going to change the angle of the front wheels. And you want to do it about the same on both sides. So let's go back to the example. Because we have toe in, i.e. the front edges of the tires are pointing inward, we want to shorten the steering rod. So if we shorten up that orange rod, we're going to pull, trying to get myself lined up, pull the back edge of the tire toward the body of the car. Okay? And again, drawing a picture of this while you're doing it can help. By changing the lengths, you change the settings on your front wheels. You're moving the back edge of the tire either inward or outward, depending on what you need. So here's a quiz. Don't you love quizzes? No, nobody does. For the zero toe, there's nothing we need to do. That's good. But I guarantee, and what I see most of the time is, for some reason, cars tend to be towed out. Right, the tires pointing outwards, like that middle example. So how would we fix that second one, the toe out? Play the Jeopardy theme song here. How do we fix that? I think, remember, you're moving the back edge of the tire. We want to move the back edges out away from the body to get the tires to start pointing more and more straight. So what do? Oop, wrong click. Lengthen the steering rods. Right, that's going to push the back edge of the tire on both sides away from the body and get the tires pointing down the racetrack. And so the next one's easy, right? What do we do to fix that toe in? We shorten those rods and pull the back edge of the tire toward the body of the car. Okay, well, how do we do that? Right now, with the threaded rods that come with the kit, they're just threaded from one end to the other. So if you put a nut on there and spin it, it'll just go from one end and eventually fall off the other end. So what happens is, if you turn that rod, it's moving out of one of the rod ends, that's what the picture is, and into the other. So you're not changing the length of the steering arms at all. Okay? So what you have to do is do them individually. So that's why I built this one. It's not as easy as just turning the rods. Eventually one's going to be fully into the rod end and the other one will probably be falling off of the other one. So it doesn't do anything. So what you have to do is actually take the steering apart a little bit, get those rod ends loose, loosen up the jam nuts on them, and physically turn the rod ends either in or out based on, do we need to lengthen or shorten the steering rods. So that's what this is all about. If you just sit and turn the rod on the car, doesn't matter, F24 or Goblin, you're not going to change the length of that steering rod. Okay. Yep, in the way. And this can be a little bit fiddly. But so you disconnect the rod end, and the easiest one to disconnect is the one out by the wheel itself, where it hooks into the steering arm. Disconnect that, drop it down, and now once I loosen the little jam nut, now I can turn either clockwise, counterclockwise the rod end and move it either in or out depending on what I need to do. So disconnect the rod end, adjust the rod end by turning it clockwise to shorten, you're threading it onto the rod, or counterclockwise to lengthen. And give it, one turn on both sides. Then put it back together, remeasure. And that'll give you an idea as to, okay, one complete turn, so half, one. And I actually count them out myself. That changed our toe by 1/4 inch, and we need to change it by 1/2. So I need to do another turn. And it may take 5 or 6 times to get it just right. It is a little bit fiddly, but the results are dramatic. Again, rolling resistance is really one of the keys to going quickly in a Green Prix car. Okay? Once you finally get the measurements done and you're happy with where your toe is, don't forget to re-snug those jam nuts. Okay? They just help make sure nothing comes loose. But you can leave those loose while you're doing these adjustments. No need to snug those back up. Snug everything back up once you get it where you want it, and your car will be ready to go. One of the things I would note, though, sometimes that rod is, you've got 6 turns on the steering column side and 1.5 turns on the wheel side. Try to get it centered as best you can. The thing, just use caution. You don't want like 1/2 or just 1 turn of threads so that the steering rod is just barely biting onto the rod end. You want it in there a couple, 3 turns if possible, and it should be. Okay? If you run out, if you're falling off the end of the rod end, now you're going to have to adjust the other end. And it's not hugely difficult. It's just you've got like on the Goblins, both of the rod ends are bolted together. So I'm probably making this more complicated than I should. Okay, now here's where I am going to, and this is just food for thought. If setting the toe on your car is like the limit of your expertise, that's cool. Get them zeroed out the best you can. But just a little food for thought. With a rear-wheel drive car, like our Goblins, like our F-24s, and that's what the red arrow is pointing here, that's your thrust vector. When a car actually rear-wheel drive starts to roll, the rear wheels are pushing the front, and what actually happens, especially if there's a little slop in the steering, which our cars have, the 2 front wheels actually toe out just slightly. Because the drive force is coming from the rear, the front wheels are just freewheeling, and just the nature of friction pushes the front edge outward. So maybe if you want to really fiddle with this, you may want maybe an 1/8 inch of toe in. I'm not going to give you an exact number that's perfect to make your car super fast, but that would be something to play with on a test and tune. See how it feels driving wise, and if it doesn't increase your speed or decrease your lap time just a little bit. Okay, just a little food for thought. Here's one more, just to confuse everybody. Okay, so not much, a wee bit, because we're talking Scottish now. If when you get out of Green Prix, or let's say your first car is like a Honda front-wheel drive. Front-wheel drive cars are the opposite. And again, this is just food for thought. But because the thrust now is coming from the front tires pulling the car, typically a front-wheel drive car will have just a little bit of toe out, because as the wheels start to pull the car, they naturally do this and generate a little bit of movement. Okay, so like on my my old Mini Cooper front-wheel drive, I've got an 1/8 inch of toe out, so that now when the car is under power and pulling forward, that goes to 0. Okay, I'm not going to go beyond that. There are some advantages, disadvantages when you get into racing about toe. But really what we're looking for here is minimum rolling resistance, okay? And remember, both toe in and toe out increase rolling resistance. You want the car using minimum amperage, minimum power to roll straight. I think I've said that enough. Second thing is known as camber, and that's the tilt of the wheels. And this is more F-24 centric, because the Goblins really can't do much with this, right? The F-24s can. So this first one, we're looking at the nose toward the back of an F-24. 0 camber means the wheels are straight up and down. So on toe, you're kind of looking from above, toe in, toe out. On camber, you're looking from the front toward the back. Negative camber, you can see it here, and I've exaggerated it a bit, but the tops of the wheels are actually tilted in just a little bit. Okay? And then positive camber, the opposite. And the F-24s do have a little bit of adjustment here. Now again, the perfect setup, I don't know. 0 camber is probably a very good place to start, and maybe a touch of negative. Positive camber generally is not a good thing on any kind of automotive device. Right? To fix it, that's the other piece. Okay, great. What can I do about it? What you do on an F-24 is you either lengthen the upper or shorten the lower A-arm. And that's sort of a misnomer, but the A-arms are these pieces that come off of the body itself and go out to your steering lug, your steering arms. Right, and those two. And you can imagine if I shorten this bottom one, it's going to pull the lower edge of the tire in and get me more towards 0 camber. And of course the opposite then for the other side. You would lengthen the lower or shorten the upper, or a combination of the two, maybe what you need to do to try to get yourself back toward that 0 camber setting, if that's what you want. And here's, it's not the greatest picture, but it was about the best one I could find on the internet. This is looking at an F-24. This would be your upper A-arm here, lower A-arm here. They're solid pieces, but you can see they do look sort of like the letter A. And so you have that threaded rod end, easy for me to say, that connects to your steering arm. And you can see by shortening and lengthening those two in combination, or maybe just one side, you can affect the tilt, the camber of your tires. Right? If you see that the car's wearing out the inside edge of the tires, you may have too much negative camber. So the car is riding on that inner edge. Right? These things don't have a great contact patch. The tires are skinny and hard, but you still want to maximize your grip in the corners. Okay? And now let me go a little deeper on that as well. So that's just what I've said. Extend the upper, shorten the lower. It just changes the tilt. And to me, this one's a little more intuitive. I would still write down my adjustments. And to check camber, you can just set a level against the edge of the wheel, make it, top and bottom in the same place. And they actually do sell what are known as camber gauges, but those get kind of pricey. And that can help you measure the tilt of your front tires. Camber to me is pretty easy to see just by eyeballing the tire itself. But use a bubble level to help you with that. Okay, so why would I want a little negative camber? You might not. I'm not trying to set the cars up for you, but you may. And so here's a picture of my hot rod, and this is down at Sebring a few years ago. So I'm racing at Sebring, and I drew the picture. I tilted it to make the car flat, and notice what's happening. This is a fairly high-speed left-hand corner, and if you look at the outside, the right side tires, they're actually tilted over into positive camber. The inside, the left side tires with the red arrow, are in negative camber. But here's what I don't really care about is that inside tire. It's not doing a lot of work. The outside, the green arrow, all of that weight transfer, and if you don't understand that, go back to the Green Prix Racing Basics link down there at the bottom. The car in a left-hand turn is transferring most of its weight over to those two right side tires, front and rear. They're doing almost all the work of making the car turn and go fast through the corner. So I looked at that picture. What do you notice about the front wheels? I've got positive camber. That means the tire's not perfectly in contact with the racing surface. Okay? So when I saw that, I was like, geez, I'm losing a little bit of grip there. So what do? Well, you go back and you measure it and you add a little negative camber. I want that green arrow tire flat on the track. This picture, it's a little bit hard to tell, but the inside edge is actually up and away from the track surface, limiting my grip. Okay, so it wasn't perfect. Solution, increase negative camber on my right side front tire. There's nothing I can do with the rears. It's called a live axle. There's nothing you can do about it. Too much information. And again, I don't really care about the inside as much because it's not doing all that much work. So what I did, I added a little bit of negative camber. I shortened the upper A-arm on this car. And then here's another picture of what it looked like after that adjustment. So this one even shows it more dramatically. This is a very tight corner at one of our hill climbs. And you can see the inside, the left-hand front tire, it's not doing a whole lot of work. And look how much of it's not in contact with the track. But I don't care because I want this one fully in contact. So look at this. Now it's flat and it's straight up and down. So I am maximizing how much grip I have with that tire in the corner to make the car go faster through the corner, right? And I think that's pretty much what I've said. So I increased it by about 1.5 degrees. Now the tire's flat on the pavement. That's what I wanted, okay? Faster through the corner. Just, I don't know, FYI, I'm not saying this is the magic numbers. This is just what I have on my Lotus, is 0 toe and 3 degrees of negative camber. And that seems to work pretty well. If, and some of you probably have, watched Formula One, I hope I don't get a copyright issue here. This is staring at the front of a Ferrari. Notice how much negative camber Formula One cars have because they generate huge amounts of downforce, but when they're in the corner, they want the outside tire that's doing all the work flat on the ground. So that's typical of what you'll see in race cars because they don't care. Going down the straightaway and the tires are like this, who cares? The front tires aren't doing much. They're keeping the car from grinding on the road is about it. But when they go into that corner, they want that outside tire flat against the ground, giving them maximum contact patch, maximum grip. Plus, it's a cool picture, isn't it? Okay, that was it for the tech tips. on video or suspension wise. Let's talk a couple driver and then a wiring tip. We'll call it a day. For the drivers, we've noticed this on the last few, and it's a natural, it just happens. Where your eyeballs go is where the car goes. We teach that to new drivers in our street survival as well. So if you look somewhere, human nature is, if I look over here, I'm going to turn slightly in the direction I'm looking. Okay? Is that bad? It can be. So if you're looking at the advisor, and I was watching you guys as you went by with the lap counts for the Goblins and then for the pit inside for the F-24s, most all of you did a really good job just kind of driving, getting on the front straightaway, quick glance over, and then back to where you're going. And that's what you want to do, because the natural tendency is to turn toward them. So just be careful about that. But more importantly, and this is where we see some collisions occur, is a car passing you. And I saw a lot of this going on. When a car was coming up, the driver would do this and actually look over at the car coming by. And guess what happens? They start to steer that way. Okay? And that could cause a few of the collisions. So when a car's passing you, what do? Well, you can see what the issue is, and I've got a picture of it right there. If either of these guys in the pink or the green Goblin looks at the other car, most likely they'll have a collision because they're very close together, which is okay, but you don't want to run into each other. So what you want to do is let the pass happen. You keep looking at where you want your car to go. Just use your peripheral vision to see the car going by you. Or if you're the one doing the pass, the car disappearing behind you. But don't do this and watch them go by, because you're going to move into them. And you can see in this case, it's not going to take a lot for those two to collide. Okay? Look ahead, use your peripheral vision. Once the pass is complete, now maybe I move and get over behind the car that passed me and follow them. Do a little drafting. Okay? Drive your line, leave racing room, let the pass happen without turning your head dramatically. And that's why on the F-24s we have the rear view mirrors, so you really don't have to move your head much. In fact, a couple of cars had them mounted such that it was in their peripheral vision. They could see clearly ahead, but the setup of the mirrors looked really good to me. Okay. All right. Last one. This is kind of a team tip, I would say. We had a couple, 3 cars, F-24s, have wiring issues. The terminal ends came loose off of the battery, and thus they had to come in and fix it. Quick fix, yes, but they do come loose. So the terminals where you screw the leads into the batteries, they won't take a lot of torque, so it's hard to really crank them down. The other thing is, I've noticed on a lot of the kits that the size of the hole is actually way bigger, where it would come up and off of the screw if it wasn't tightened down. And that seems like a bad setup as well. Yes, you can tug it in and tighten it down, but if you start to lose a little bit of that tightness, that's easy for that terminal end to come loose and actually come off the battery. So a couple suggestions, you guys can figure out your own way to fix it. Either a washer under the screw that goes into the battery, maybe just screw it down with a washer and then hit a whack of duct tape on top of it to keep it from coming loose. And the other thing I saw, let me end the presentation and show you, on Amazon, this is up to you, I'm not trying to plug any kind of product, but I saw at least one team had these. Okay, these brass lugs that actually your screw goes inside, tightens down, but it gives you more surface area here to hold that terminal on the battery. Now again, be careful, don't torque them, gorilla tight. You just want them good and snug, and then some way of kind of holding them from coming loose. Here's the last piece I'll say, and again, this gets kind of technical. This is not the right thread for the batteries that we have. These lugs will work fine, but don't use these screws that come with the kit. Use the ones you have. Or if you want to get longer kind of Allen screws that come up all the way to the top so that you can see that the thing is tight, and actually whack down some tape on there. The thread for the batteries, the 2 I had in my garage, I just went and looked at them, are M5 by 0.8. It's a metric thread, M5 0.8. You know what? I should have put that on. Did I? Yeah, I did. It's right there. If you go, I don't know what that means. It doesn't matter. It has to do with the size of the screw and the thread of the screw. But if you need something, just go to ACE with those numbers written down, and they can help you out. Right? I need an M5 by 0.8. Right. I think that's it. 25 minutes, man. I talk too much, don't I? So some tips on suspension, just maybe understanding a suspension, something you may want to play around with a little bit of. Checking your toe is 0 is a great starting point. Checking your camber is 0 is probably a great starting point. And then now you have a place to adjust from and see if it makes the car better or worse. And the ultimate judge of that is lap times. Okay? And that's what those test days can be useful for. So I will see you guys in the spring. I'll make another team kind of prep video as we approach the spring based on where the location is. We don't know yet. And man, it's only a few days ago, but I'm already looking forward to the spring Green Prix races. So enjoy your holiday season. I will see you guys in May.